I always say to people, this is a lens in which to view the data. It isn't the full story. You should be looking through different lenses. You're not going to get everything you want from just looking at attribution. I just don't think it's possible. You have to look at the full story.
It's Attribution Nation time, where we look at attribution from multiple angles in a unique mini-series format. You're in the trenches with me for the next 5 episodes, talking to attribution practitioners. Let's go. And our guest on this episode of the podcast is Kimberly Galitz, currently Senior Manager of Marketing Operations at F5, previously at Bandwidth. And we're going to talk a little bit more about Kimberly's background as we dive into our topics for today. Kimberly's got some really unique perspective here because she's been both on the B2C side and the B2B side. And so, Kimberly, just talk to us a little bit about how you first got into marketing operations.
Yeah, probably like everybody else, where you just kind of fall headfirst into it because you're the type that likes to dig into problems and fix them, and then you just fall in love. That's pretty much how it was. I was kind of the marketing person that wore a lot of hats at some of the smaller organizations I was at. I did web analytics, content management, all of that stuff, and that's just kind of where that path led me to be in marketing operations.
I feel seen. That sounds very familiar.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then at one point in time, you were working at Walgreens doing analysis for email programs. And so tell me a little bit about that role and how you were kind of able to analyze email programs and do ROI analysis there, because that's very different, because that's more on the B2C side. So tell us a little bit about how you were managing that process.
Yeah. So we obviously had a whole lot of tools there to help us with that. But we reported each week on every single email send. So we kept track of every click, every open, every subject line test, every image test, anything you can think of, and then report it out to the business stakeholders every week. So the thing about that is that you get immediate results. B2C is more like, what was on sale this week and did it work? And B2B is the long game. So it's very, very different. But we kept track of everything week over week, obviously month over month and year over year. But the results were immediate. So we were always tracking instantly what was going on with those email sends. So we used quite a few different tools, email send tools, as well as reporting tools, all the way through to the sales and the revenue from each product that we had in the email. So very different world than that B2C world, I would say.
Yeah. So your emails were more of like an e-commerce play, like, hey, here's what's on sale. Click here, go buy the thing. And so you were able to pretty quickly and easily track ROI because it's an e-commerce motion. Yeah.
Right. And your audiences are obviously wildly different. You're not going after a business, you're going after a person, and what their preferences are, what they like to buy, their age group, all of that stuff. So it's very, very different than B2B.
Yeah. Yeah. So then you switched to B2B. And how was that transition going from B2C to B2B for you?
It was like coming home because I had been in B2B for a long time. So it was definitely like coming home. I like both. They're very different. But coming back to B2B, so much had changed even in a couple of years. There was just a lot more digital going on, like digital this, ad this, webinars were not really a thing and they were starting to become a thing. So there was a lot more that you had to do digitally to track things at scale. So when I went back to B2B, it was all about scale because it was ramping up quickly and we were doing a lot of manual stuff. So it was like, how can I make this automated?
Okay. Got it. Yeah. Yeah. That's, I mean, it's crazy how fast technology changes. And so, yeah, being 2 years in B2C and then coming back to B2B, it's like a whole different world. Yeah. So now you switch over to B2B and now you've got a whole different tech stack now. So tell me a little bit about what are some of the technologies that you've used to report on ROI for different campaigns?
Yeah. So it started as a lot of manual Salesforce report exporting and Excel magic, which is when I started my there has to be a better way quest because this can't be it. As much as I thoroughly enjoyed text to columns reporting, it just wasn't scalable and it relied way too much on manual work, human error issues and stuff like that. So we went from having Salesforce reporting export into an Excel doc that I would share with the team to me searching for tools that would do this automatically at scale, which is what actually initially led me to attribution, because I was at that time just looking for first touch. We were just looking at lead create type of attribution reporting, and that was great for us, but we were doing it manually. So I was looking for a tool to do it for me.
Okay. And which tool did you start with when you went down that path?
Yeah, I actually landed on Bizible first. So that was actually when they were itty bitty and they did first touch attribution, and they were actually just starting multi-touch. So at that time they were like, hey, we actually can do this too. And, me not knowing what any of it was at that time was like, cool, sounds great. But that's where we landed. There were only a few players at that time. I needed something I could get up and running real fast. So Bizible was able to accommodate that, and that's where we landed.
Okay. So was that like 2015, 2016-ish?
Yes, I think it was 2015 or 2016. That was so long ago now. Like one of those.
Yeah. So you were an early adopter. Back then it was probably, your choices were probably Bizible and Full Circle at that time. I think that was
who I really looked into. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you hopped on to Bizible at that point in time, early adopter, and that's really what started your multi-touch journey that you went on.
Yes.
Okay. So now, as you're creating your reporting, you got on Bizible and you started using Bizible and you're creating your reporting and you're digging in, and there's always going to be some additional gaps that need to be filled. So back in those early days, what were the types of gaps that you still had to solve for, and how did you solve for them?
Yeah. Back then it was more getting it right and getting them to understand it. I think that that's always the case. But we had my marketing team was fantastic. They were really on their game, setting up everything that they needed to capture the data correctly. I think some of the gaps that happen are really not necessarily reporting gaps as much as I said, like they're knowledge gaps. So not understanding what the attribution means, not understanding how it relates to a different report, because we would run analytics report like Google Analytics reports. And like, how do you look at the data sets from both of these tools and tell your story and make those decisions based on both reports? Because one is like all anonymous data and you can see a lot more because it's clicks and this and that. And one is cookie-based and campaign-based and event-based, and you don't always get all the data and how you marry those. So I think the gap sometimes people really focus on is like, well, Google Analytics or whatever analytics tool I have shows this many form fills. And then I'm over here in Bizible, or now obviously Marketo Measure, and I'm showing something else. Like, why is there a gap? And I think people sometimes get really stuck on like that they should match because they're not looking at the exact same thing. And I think that is a gap I've been dealing with in my career like this entire time. So
yeah, because it's interesting because you're talking about the difference between like Google Analytics and what Bizible is showing. But then there's also even a gap, like if you compare that to what Marketo or your marketing automation platform saying, the platform that's actually hosting the forms, that might even tell a slightly different story, where that's telling you, like Google Analytics is telling you 75 people filled out the form. Marketo or your marketing automation platform is like, no, it's 80. And then Bizible's like, no, it's 65. And you're like, well, which one's right? And in reality, like they're all right, because even though the numbers are different, each one's right because it's a different methodology and a different process. So one's not right and one's not wrong. It's just they're all right in the way that they track things.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, that struggle is so real. Trying to help people understand that it's not a right and wrong. It's a different methodology. Yeah.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah. So we've just talked about a lot of different pieces of technology. If you could build your perfect attribution tech stack, what's in your attribution tech stack?
Oh gosh, that's really hard. I think obviously I was an early adopter of Bizible, so that's been my thing. There are so many more in the market now that I think are great. And I think some of them work a lot better for different use cases. Now I'm at a pretty big org, and I think that Marketo Measure does a great job supporting bigger organizations, and our tech stack has a lot of Adobe products, so it works very well for us. I think there's something to be said for when you have a lot of products that are under the same cloud umbrella, whatever we want to call it, it's helpful for a lot of reasons. So obviously I've been on them for a long time, but I think it's equally important to have reports that are including that website data. So if you have Adobe Analytics or Google Analytics, I want to see that data. So making sure you have something like that in your tech stack. And then in addition to that, if you are using attribution to show sales touch points, making sure that you're incorporating what sales is doing somehow and looking at it and kind of marrying that to the marketing efforts that are going on, because that your story is not complete, obviously, without sales. Obviously, they're doing a whole lot of work, and it's fine to look at them in silos if you're doing it for reasons like, I want to know exactly how many marketing dollars went to marketing things. Great. Yep. But I want to always see the whole story at the end of the day. So making sure whether that's CRM reports or you're pulling it into a BI tool. I am a big fan of pulling everything into a BI tool, but it also requires a lot of resources. So if you're not a big organization, it's not always feasible. So making sure that if you don't have a BI tool, you're somehow taking that data and looking at it as well. I don't have perfect, I like a lot of tools. So obviously I would have everything if I could, but I just think making sure that you're checking those boxes, like web attribution of some sort, sales reports of some sort. Yeah.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I've seen, because you mentioned the sales activities piece, and one of the things that I think I've seen that works really, really well, because, we work with a lot of clients that are just getting started on their attribution journey and doing their implementation. And when I'm working with a client and we start talking about the sales piece, if they say that they have Outreach, SalesLoft, or any other tool like that, I'm thrilled, because that typically creates really, really good, rich activity data in Salesforce that allows us to say, hey, we can actually use this in our attribution modeling. So to your point, I think having those pieces of technology that plug into those systems, super important. Because if you don't have an Outreach or a SalesLoft and you're relying on sales reps to manually log their phone calls and meetings, I can guarantee you it ain't happening. So unless you're paying them money to do that, which you probably aren't, it's not happening. So I think that having a tool like that in place to help is just really, really important.
Yeah. So
with attribution, obviously you're a proponent. You've been doing it. You're an early adopter, and you've been doing it now for a very, very long time. There's a lot of folks out in the marketplace that say that attribution doesn't work, or that there's too many gaps in attribution. What do you say to the folks that would say that attribution doesn't work or it's a waste of time?
Yeah. And I respect that opinion. I understand where that's coming from. I think, as we mentioned before, those gaps between why don't the form fills all match? Why is it so different? Or if you aren't using sales touch points with your attribution, there's often that argument well, that's only part of the story. Agree. So I think it's the view of which people are looking at attribution well, I just am looking at attribution, I'm missing all of this. Yeah, you would be. If you aren't looking at everything else, you are missing a lot of the story. So I always say to people, this is a lens in which to view the data. It isn't the full story. You should be looking through different lenses. You're not going to get everything you want from just looking at attribution. I just don't think it's possible. You have to look at the full story. So I get it. I totally understand where they're coming from. But I would also encourage people to look into it as part of their solution, because I do think it's really helpful. It gives you a lot of rich data that is really, really hard to track unless you have a tool to help you track it, because you're either too manual or relying on humans to do things that they probably don't have time to do, and they get pushed to the back burner, and then you're not tracking. So I get where they're coming from, but I also say give it a chance, because it is a really good tool to add to your stack.
I love that it's a lens. It's one lens of many that you should be using to view data, but it's not something that you should rely solely on that. I love that. Yeah, that's great. That's great. Again, you've been doing this forever. So what are some of the biggest challenges that marketers face in getting the data and insights that they need to complete that picture and to be able to generate, those those little nuggets that you find that allow us to do better marketing?
Yeah, I think alignment is a huge one. And so early on, getting people aligned on like, what are the channels? What are the sub-channels? What does that mean? What types of interactions are we tracking and using in attribution? Like, what's meaningful to my business? I always tell people, like, do you care if they register for the webinar? That's fine. Do you care if they attend? Do you don't care if they register because it's a form fill and you don't really care? What are the things that truly matter to you and you want to really represent in that reporting, in that data set? So alignment is huge there. And depending on what your org structure is, it's often really important to have those channel managers be the voice of their channel for that. So we can set up anything we want, right? We give touch points to whatever member status in that campaign or whatever events or tasks or what have you. So getting them aligned and then helping them with their reporting. Because if they don't understand what that data is telling them, they're not going to use it, which is fair. And it's not helpful. So making sure they're on board with understanding what that data set is telling them. So those are my two biggest things. It's the very beginning and then it's the very end, how you use that data.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's to your point. I think it's critical to align on what are the key metrics and KPIs that we should be tracking, right? To your point, we can configure the tool to track registrations, or we can configure the tool to ignore registrations. But if we don't align organizationally on the fact that, yes, we want to track registrations, then we're kind of, it's like throwing darts while blindfolded. Like we're trying to hit a target, but we don't even know where we're aiming.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I agree. That's critical. That's very critical. So now, if I remember correctly from your history in our conversations, you've used Bizible in more than one organization. And I believe that you've had to convince a leader to purchase Bizible. So how do you convince leadership to invest in a piece of technology that you want and feel is critical to your tech stack?
Yeah, that's a really good point, because it is hard, and it's much harder when budgets are cut, which has been happening a lot, right? So for Bizible or any other tool, really, I'll answer it pretty broadly. I have brought on quite a few tools, but if you can't prove what it will do for the organization, it makes it a lot harder. There's a few ways I've done it. I've put together your good old PowerPoint presentation or Google Slides presentation and showing like, this is what the tool is, this is what it does, really high level. Sometimes I've made that presentation and still gotten the like, yeah, we don't need it, fine. But if I know that it's a huge pain point for the organization, one thing I've done that actually it's worked for me, hopefully it'll work for some others that listen to this. If you know it's a pain point for you and your team or another team, if you have a project management tool or however you manage your incoming requests, if it's something you can't do that the tool would solve, I would make a column, or, if you're using like a Trello or something where you have columns for projects, I've made a column that's like name of tool. And then I would just drag the card in there and say that this project's rejected, but we could have done it if we had this tool. I've done it where that column fills up. And then I go say like, I had to reject all these tickets because we just don't have the capability, or we don't have the resources. It works with resources too. But this tool would cover this. And then finally they're like, oh, that's a business case. Like I see all the work that cannot be done because we don't have a tool to do it. So that's kind of like where you can really sell, like seeing the sheer amount of projects that you've been like, can't do it. Sorry, we don't have the tool for it. So it's just hard to sell, I think, on PowerPoints. Like I make them, I give them that 30,000 foot view or whatever, but it's really hard to sell until you have that concrete data of what you did not do for the org because you don't have it.
I love that. That is really such a cool idea. People that are listening to this, steal this, because this is how you get your tech stack approved. You show what you can't do because you don't have the tool that you need to do it. That is awesome. I love that. I've also heard, I did not coin this phrase, I stole it from somebody, but I've also heard a phrase called gentle pressure applied relentlessly. And it's just this, every once in a while, you just kind of say, well, yeah, I mean, if we had that tool that I've been telling you about, I could do this in 5 minutes, but instead it's going to take me 5 hours. And the next time it comes up, you just kind of gently pick at that little thing over and over and over again. It's the concept of, well, how did the Grand Canyon get built? Well, it didn't get built in one day. It was gentle pressure applied relentlessly. So, but I love your idea there. That is fantastic. I'm probably going to steal that idea.
Please myself. Do. I hope everyone does.
Yeah.
Very concrete data. So.
Yeah. Although anybody that's a member of my team, please don't steal that, because now you know the key to get me to invest in something. So yeah, just ignore this. Now, I want to flip that on its head a little bit. We talked about how you get a leader to invest in the tech that you want to invest in. So we all know that, for example, CMOs have an average tenure that's only about 1.5 to 2 years. So your CMO changes. How do you convince your CMO that when they're doing their evaluation of, people, process, and technology in their organization, how do you convince your CMO, no, you cannot touch this. You cannot take that budget away to remove this piece of technology?
That is a really good question, and much harder than the other question. I would say the way I've done it, and again, it's not always going to work. They're going to take tech away. I get it. Proving what that tool's currently doing. So similar to that whole column thing, like these are the reports we're getting, but I kind of flip it and say, hey, if we didn't have it, I don't have any tool in place that would give us this report or this data set. We wouldn't be able to track pipeline because I will now have to go find a report to build. We don't have anything set up today. Historical data is a huge one to pull out at that point. Like, I don't have any historical data if I get a new tool or switch tools. A lot of times it's, I want to switch.
Yeah.
Okay. Like, now we're going to lose this much historical data. Now I have to have a data team to stitch the data sets together to make sense of year over year data. Like, the resources that go into that, the money that ultimately goes into that, because you have to make the switch, or, if they're like, oh, but we can build this in-house, that's another one that comes up a lot. Great, but are you going to give me 4 headcount to support it forever? Because if it's in-house, that gets pushed to the back burner most of the time for most people. If it's an homegrown tool and an issue comes up that's customer facing, you're taking the customer facing ticket. So it's like, do you have the headcount that are 100% dedicated to this tool and nothing customer facing, which that's very hard to get in an organization. So I like to pull the what ifs, and I don't have anything to replace this because these 5 things. It isn't always going to work, but it's definitely something to use, because a lot of times they don't know what they won't have if they get rid of it.
Yeah. And particularly with that home, the home built, the homegrown thing, the DIY thing. The other thing that always gets forgotten is so I'm with Bizible or whatever attribution platform you're on. Not only do we have to maintain that, but they're innovating. They're doing new cool stuff. Are we going to innovate?
Right.
Or is our tool going to eventually just be, 5 years old, 6 years old, 7 years old down the road, and we've not continued to keep up with the innovation cycle for the tool that we could have bought?
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah. I mean, how are you gonna decide down the road, like, hey, we onboarded with 6 Sense, so are we going to go create a relationship with the 6 Sense product team to build a custom integration between our DIY attribution system and 6 Sense's ad platform to pull in ad data? No, we're not going to do that. Of course, we're not going to do that.
Yeah.
But the makers of the attribution platforms are doing that type of stuff. They're constantly innovating. So we're just going to fall behind.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, there's another challenge that comes up a lot when we're talking about attribution, and that is sometimes we have to tell people that their babies are ugly. Their campaigns didn't perform well. How do you navigate that? Because that is tough.
Yeah, that is hard. I think most people are reasonable. And if you can help them figure out the why behind it and suggestions to make it better, it's often a lot less hard to have that conversation. So helping them see, like, if you can pinpoint why it didn't work, like, can you figure out that it was the audience you targeted was wrong? Was timing bad? That kind of thing. If you can help them figure out the why and a suggestion to fix it, then I think it's like the compliment bad news sandwich or whatever they call it. It's similar to that. And I think most people are reasonable. Plus, at the end of the day, it's their budget. And if it's not working, they're not going to get that budget. Nobody wants that. So if you can kind of frame it like, I want to make sure you get what budget you need in the next fiscal year, let's make a campaign that's different than this one because I want to make sure you can get that budget. I don't think they're going to be super mad. Like, sure, it didn't work. Let's not harp on that. Let's move on to like, this is going to make it better in the future. But yeah, that is one that's really hard. And I know, I mean, a lot of marketers pour their blood, sweat, and tears into those campaigns. So it's really tough to be like, oh, I'm sorry that one didn't land. But I mean, sometimes it just happens. So it's a tough.
Yeah. I mean, not every campaign's going to work well. Like I mean, we swing and miss all the time. So we can't expect that every single campaign is going to perform amazing.
Yeah.
But I think that there does need to be some sort of bedside manner there in helping people understand, hey, I'm not picking on you. I'm picking on this campaign and trying to make it so that it can perform better. Or if we have an opportunity to fix this campaign while it's in flight, or learn from it so that the next one doesn't miss for the same reason.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that's actually you just highlighted another advantage to attribution is like, it's in flight and you can figure that stuff out, right? Like make those changes and make it better before it's over. So that's an advantage to having that data set. So yeah. I mean, and I don't want to steal your thunder at all, because I'm sure you've done this as well, but like we did that once with a client where they had launched a brand new paid search campaign, and we did like a 30-day check-in. And this was like a campaign that was going to run for 9 months. And we did a 30-day check-in and realized that it was at the high level metrics. It had a great conversion rate, had a great cost per lead. It was a direct response ad where it was an auto qualify request a demo form. So it looked like it was performing great. But what we realized very quickly is that none of those MQLs were actually turning into opportunities. And so we were able to like hit pause on the campaign at 30 days. So we didn't waste any more money on bad MQLs, go fix the problem, which ultimately ended up being a very simple problem to fix. It was actually just an image in the ad, on the landing page on the ad, that made it look very quaint and down home, type of thing. But they didn't have a solution for that type of account. So we just had to fix the image. And once we fixed the image, like it fixed the whole thing. So we were able to prevent wasting a bunch of money on an ad that wasn't going to work. Yeah.
So that at the 30-day mark, instead of waiting 9 months. So yeah.
It is an advantage, I will say.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's kind of like put on our telescope lenses here and let's look into the future. Where do you think, we're going to start generally with like just marketing operations. Where do you think the profession of marketing operations is going?
I see it going even more technical. I mean, like you've seen the people that come out of marketing ops, and I feel like it's kind of branching into like, and I love every branch of this, which is what makes me even more of a nerd. But we have the people that are very much day-to-day practitioners and like email experts, automation tool experts, CRM experts, that kind of thing. Then you have the people that are coding in Python to do stuff on the back end with APIs. Like then we have data scientists who are then, let me take this data and tackle it and figure out what we need to do in these automation tools and these operation tools and your tech stack to make it better. So there's data science, there's coding, there's email specialists, it's all different types of specialists coming in and making marketing operations or any type of operations what it is. And I think it's going to become more heavily reliant on one another to figure out how that works together. I don't know how to code in Python, right? But like that stuff that people are doing is so cool. I'd love to learn it someday, right? But it's not my expertise. And so I'm like, oh man, but if we had someone that was coding in Python and doing all this stuff, and I know it doesn't work at every org, but that stuff's really powerful. And how do you get more people focused on these little things and brought into marketing operations? Because it's great if you have one person that can do that, but then if they leave the org and then the rest of your team, like, I don't know, Python, like, are you stuck? So it's like, It's a very delicate balance right now. I think it's really neat and exciting, but I definitely see it going more scientific, more computer science, more data analysis, like that kind of thing in the future, because the more powerful it becomes when everybody understands how it works together, it's going to be kind of unstoppable, which is pretty neat.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think like even just going back to as long as I've been in marketing operations, marketing operations used to be primarily focusing on getting emails out the door and getting landing pages built. Now you're dealing with multiple different APIs. You're dealing with Python and SQL and data science, and it's expanding, and it's getting into some really cool areas too. Because like I love data and data science, and I mean I'm not a data scientist, but I know enough to be like really really dangerous. But now like we get to start doing things with like, hey, let's add in some like a regression analysis. And that really gets us to kind of, build some muscles that we've never had to use before. And that to me is really, really fun and exciting.
Yeah, totally.
So same question now for attribution and marketing data. Where do you see attribution and marketing data going?
Yeah, well, I guess I'd be remiss if I didn't mention AI. That is going to be huge, I think, as things evolve. And like, I think going back to your point about people that like attribution doesn't work, it's just this random thing that you just assign credit to. Like AI is going to make that way cooler. Like the AI, the modeling that it's going to do to like specifically for your data set and your audience and the insights that can give you is going to be huge. I'm super excited for that. I think that is one of the gaps that we've had in attribution all these years is like the data is there. It's kind of static because of those weighted models, but it's still really helpful. But can we make it even more helpful, more powerful with this model that is figuring it all out for us? So I think that will help, especially in reporting. I think it will help in every piece in our tech stack. And then I think in general, I think bringing them all together, like I mentioned, I know BI tools are typically for bigger orgs and it's not always going to be something you can do. But if you can join that data set somehow, some way, and tell that story, I think that is really powerful too.
Yeah. The thing I love about bringing AI into attribution and marketing data is how it increases the accessibility of being able to drive the insights. I know so many folks, and I'm going to say this, and this is absolutely not a knock on anybody that resembles this, but like I know a lot of people that got into marketing from things like creative and graphic design or literature. Like I know so many people that got into marketing because they were literature majors and they got in through copywriting or other creative disciplines where it's people that haven't had to think about math or use math since high school.
Yeah.
And now suddenly they're being asked to evaluate complex data sets, which attribution is a very complex data set. And they're being asked to do that, and they haven't flexed math muscles since high school.
Yeah.
And they get lost. And it's not a knock on them. It's just they're being asked to do something they haven't had to do in 10, 15, 20, 25 years. So they're obviously not going to be great at something if they haven't been practicing it. But AI helps bridge that gap by saying, hey, you don't have to know how to do regression analysis. You don't have to know how to do, calculus. I'm doing it for you.
Yeah.
So I think that's the thing I love about AI is that. Yeah. And then one of the cool things that you mentioned about like the BI platform, we've seen some really cool applications where people are starting to marry like their attribution data with like product data in the BI platform. And that's really cool too, because, attribution data and product data usually don't overlap because you're usually not embedding your attribution platform inside your product.
Right.
So yeah, that's a really cool application of that.
Yeah. Love that too.
So in your opinion, like what's like the next milestone or frontier that we're all going to have when it comes to understanding which investments are working and what's not, like what's like that holy grail of attribution that we're trying to get to?
Yeah, I think honestly kind of what you just said with that marrying that product data into it as well, because I do feel like so much of marketing it doesn't obviously stop, and neither does sales. Like when someone buys your product, like you have to get them to use it and continue to use it and continue to upgrade. So being able to understand how marketing is and sales is impacting that piece, right? So the renewals, the upsells, the usage, the sheer usage of your product, and not having much insight into that today is definitely difficult, especially because, I mean, I know for us, we have a lot of marketing collateral, which is really fantastic stuff to get people to understand how to use it and to use it. We can't really measure if that worked. And that's hard because we put so much time and effort into it. And I want to know, did it work? Do we need a smaller one? Do we need like a IKEA type instruction guide for people? Like, what do people need? Because we want to make it and we want to help them. So being able to marry that data in there would be obviously like a next huge milestone for us. And to put attribution on that would just be even better. I think one of the things that's hard with attribution is kind of like, where's the cutoff, right? Like they buy and then they're using and then they upsell. And like, where do you start? Where do you stop? Where do you decide what worked and what didn't and when? And I think kind of expanding on that and making that a little bit more clear for people will be a huge help in the future.
Yeah. I love what you were saying about like tracking how that marketing collateral that we create that helps people just use the product.
Yeah.
That's usually a blind spot because it's not leading directly to like an opportunity, right? It's just helping people get better at using your product. That's usually a blind spot, and getting that married together with attribution data is I think would be huge in helping understand which communications and which marketing vehicles we're using and assets that we're creating that are not necessarily helping, drive new business or drive upsells and cross sells, but preventing churn. Right.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, you're obviously active on LinkedIn and stuff. And so I'm sure you've seen how a lot of SaaS companies nowadays are starting to focus on NRR, which is, net recurring revenue. Well, NRR as a metric is heavily influenced by retaining your customers. So how is marketing not necessarily impacting new business and upsells and cross sells? How's marketing helping retain customers?
Yep.
That's important.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we're going to switch gears entirely. I like to always close out these interviews with a little bit more of a personal type of question. Personally, I'm a huge music fan, so I always love hearing what others are listening to. So, Kimberly, what are you listening to right now? Artists, bands, genres? What's on your playlist right now?
Yeah, that's a good one. I love music too. I like to listen to anything I think I can learn on guitar because I play it like very much on the side. Like sometimes I pick it up, but I should pick it up more often. But I've always loved playing, and like, so if I hear a song that I really like, I love acoustic. It's my favorite.
Okay.
I hear a really good song that's an acoustic guitar part, I'm like, I'm gonna go learn that. But I'm really into Jelly Roll right now.
Okay.
It's everywhere. He's everywhere, but like really cool story, and he's got a lot of collabs. I really love collabs very much. So like Luke Combs, and like he's got some really good collabs too. So that's what's on my playlist right now, but it really depends on the moment, if I'm being honest. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Are you good enough at guitar where you can like hear the song and then like pick up the guitar and like figure it out?
Oh no. Nope.
Okay. All right. I
wish. I let someone else do that, and then I go look for the tab, and then I play along.
Gotcha. Yeah, the guitar tab. Yep. When I played guitar, which is a long time ago, I was a guitar tab guy myself. I was not talented enough to just like go learn. Yeah.
No, those people are great.
envious of those people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Kimberly, I wanted to just thank you so much for joining today. Thank you for sharing your experience with marketing operations, attribution, marketing data, and all that stuff. I typically like to close these out with a little bit of some key takeaways, just the things that really resonated with me that you said. So number one is, and this is probably the biggest one, was that attribution is just one lens of many through which to view the data, but it's not the end all be all. You should pair attribution data with other data and other data sources to get the full picture. Another one that really stood out to me was organizational alignment, that we have to get organizational alignment in order to complete that data picture within the attribution platform. For example, we have to work with departmental leaders to understand, do we care about when somebody registers for a webinar versus when they attend? Because we can configure the tool to do both, but we have to agree what's important to us. And then I loved your call out earlier about how to get your leadership to buy into tools, which is to showcase, really showcase the number of projects that we can't do because we don't have that tool, and really highlighting that inside of like a project management system, like you mentioned Trello, but like to highlight that and specifically call that out. Hey, by the way, we had to say no to 25 projects last quarter because we're missing a tool. Obviously, it's a need. Yeah. And then the last one that I wanted to call out is when we talked about telling people that their babies are ugly, is, you really focus on helping them understand how to do better campaigns and protect their budget as your talking point, so that they don't feel like you are calling their baby ugly. You're coming at it from the standpoint of trying to help them protect their budget and then also just do better work.
Love that.
Awesome. Well, Kimberly, again, thank you so much for joining. It's been a pleasure talking to you and, hearing your experience and getting some cool things that I think some listeners can take away. So thank you so much, Kimberly. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. It's been fun. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Like, subscribe, give us a 5-star review, and connect with me on LinkedIn. Let me know if you'd like access to our private group where we keep these conversations going. On our next episode, we'll be talking with Bailey. Bailey's the youngest guest on our show so far, and it was so cool to hear from the next generation of marketing ops talent. She's parlayed some early marketing team of one success and experience into her latest MOPS gig at Braze, and she's got some great takeaways about how attribution helped her with that journey. Hope you'll take a listen.